Let's think about percentiles. You've heard percentiles before, the word percentile. For instance, if you take your 4-year-old to the doctor, and the doctor says, well, your 4-year-old on his or her 4th birthday is at the 96th percentile in height. And what that would mean is that 96% of all 4-year-olds are shorter than your 4-year-old, and only 4% are taller. And conversely, let's say you went to the doctor and your doctor observed your bad cholesterol when you're older like me. And the doctor says, well, I got great news. Your bad cholesterol is only at the 3rd percentile, which would mean that 97% of people out there with a cholesterol level have one that's higher than yours. And that's a bad cholesterol. And only 3% have one that's lower. Well, of course, in that case, I'd love to be in the 3rd percentile. So, and of course, children's heights doesn't matter. But the one thing I want you to think of graphically when it comes to percentiles is the proportion of the distribution that's to the left and lower. Remember, numbers go up from left to right. Here are IQ scores, and I get so reluctant to talk about IQ scores all the time. But the scores go from a low of, well below 70, and let's say just hypothetically up to 130, although it goes above that. If I had an IQ score of 130 where the red bar is, you don't have to know this off the top of your head, but I'll tell you that that's roughly in the 98th percentile. 98% of scores are to the left and below 130. Conversely, let's take 100. Exactly half of scores are to the left and below 100, the 50th percentile. And that's true of the mode, the hump, if you will, in a normal distribution. And let's take 70. 2% only of scores are to the left and below 70. And these cutoffs, by the way, are what we describe as, it can qualify 2 things. Often youth in gifted programs, it takes some kind of score of 130 or better to get in there, because that puts you in the 98th percentile. If you put any faith in those sort of tests, some people don't. And also the term mental retardation, which is a clinical term in the DSM, a person has to score at 70 or lower. So in that case, we have, I guess you could say, some justification, maybe. At least it's not completely arbitrary. Or if it is arbitrary, at least we go with a consistent number, you might say. Much like the drinking age is arbitrary, but it's consistently upheld at 21. So when we're talking percentiles, think to the left and lower, if you will. Now, if we could just take a table of numbers in a table, let's take these numbers here below, and let's consider that these are 5 opportunities for quiz scores. You can either get a grade of 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. If I were to ask what score is at the 95th percentile, what score would that be? To the casual observer, if I looked at this table that has blue shading in it, that score would look to be 4. It looks to me that 4 is actually at the 95th percentile. But you'll remember we extend scores up to the upper and lower real limits. So it's actually 4.5 is at the 95th percentile, for what it's worth. And conversely, if I ask what score was at the 70th percentile, then we would say, well, geez, it's 3.5. Now, I don't want to get into too much detail on this because it does sort of go beside the point. But if you'll indulge me, you see the frequency column, and we will establish where that comes from. The column right next to that is CF, Cumulative Frequency. Where does that come from? If you'll follow my cursor, I hope you're seeing a little yellow mark. 2, we just repeat the number 2 on the bottom. So I've got 2 for frequency, and I repeat it for cumulative frequency. Then I begin to add diagonally. 2 plus 4, lost my cursor. 2 plus 4 is 6. 6 plus 8, 14. 14 plus 5, 19. 19 plus 1, 20. And that's the number of scores that have accrued as you're going from lesser to more values, lesser to greater values. So as I go from 1 to 2, I've gone from accruing 2 scores to a total of 6 scores, 2 plus 4. If I go from, strictly speaking, 2.5 to 3.5, I add 6 plus 8, if you will, and get to 14. By the time I go through 1, 2, and 3, all the way to 3.5, I've accrued 14 scores, if you will. Now, I've made a very crude drawing. I told you my drawings are embarrassing. They are. But as I go from left to right here, 0.5 to 3.5, I've accrued, in that case, 14 boxes. As you can see, and of course you can count them if you want to. It looks like a Basquiat painting, but nonetheless, it serves its purpose. So, yes, I've accrued that many. And of course, if I go from 3.5 to 4.5, I've accrued 6 more. And just as we have here, is it 5 more? It's 5. Math's hard. So when I get back, I want to do one more clip, if you will, that has to do with looking at percentile ranks on a table like this without getting into too fine a detail.